The morning had always been the hardest part of the day for Emily Carter. Not because she hated mornings. In fact, there was a time when she loved them. She loved the quiet moments before the world woke up. The soft golden light coming through the kitchen window, the smell of coffee filling the house, and the feeling that every new day carried 1,000 possibilities. But that was before the accident. Before people started looking at her face, before they looked at her eyes, before a single moment changed the way she saw herself and the way the world saw her. Now, every morning began with the same silent battle. Emily stood in front of the small bathroom mirror inside her one-bedroom apartment, holding a makeup sponge in her hand. The apartment was modest, with old wooden floors that creaked whenever she walked and faded curtains that had belonged to the previous tenant. The paint on the walls was beginning to peel near the windows, and the kitchen sink had a small leak that she kept promising herself she would fix when she had enough money. But none of those things bothered her. She had learned how to live with broken things. The problem was that every morning she had to look at the one broken thing she could never replace. Her reflection. A long scar crossed the left side of her face, starting near her temple and curving down toward her cheek. It wasn't the kind of scar that disappeared into the background. It demanded attention. It was the first thing strangers noticed and the last thing Emily wanted them to see. She touched it gently with her fingertips. For a moment, she remembered the girl she used to be. A girl who laughed loudly. A girl who took pictures without thinking twice. A girl who never wondered if someone was staring at her. Before the accident, Emily had been known as the girl who could brighten any room. Her mother used to tell her she had a smile that made people feel safe. You have the kind of heart people spend their whole lives searching for, her mother would say. Emily used to believe her until the night everything changed. She was 20, 2 years old when the car crash happened. A rainy evening, a slippery road, a truck that lost control. A moment that lasted only seconds but took away years of her life. She survived. Her best friend survived, but her father didn't. And while everyone told her she was lucky to be alive, Emily secretly wondered why surviving had to hurt so much. The doctors repaired what they could. They saved her life. They fixed her injuries. They told her she was strong. Nobody prepared her for what happened afterward. The whispers. The uncomfortable stares. People who suddenly became kinder in a way that felt like pity. The dates that ended after one meeting. The job interviews where people smiled politely and promised to call but never did. The world had not said she was ugly. They didn't have to. Emily felt it every time someone looked away too quickly. She placed a small amount of concealer over the scar, carefully blending it even though she knew it would never completely disappear. She wasn't trying to hide who she was. At least, that was what she told herself. She was just trying to make the world a little easier to face. The clock on the wall showed 60:15 a.m. Emily sighed. Another day. Another battle. She pulled her brown hair over one side of her face, put on her faded blue Waitress uniform, and grabbed the bag she had prepared the night before. Inside were a sandwich, an apple, and a small bottle of water. She couldn't afford to buy lunch during her shift anymore. Not after the rent increase. Not after the medical bills. Not after everything life had taken from her. She locked the door behind her and walked down the stairs of her apartment building. Outside, the city was slowly waking up. Cars moved through the streets. People rushed toward jobs they probably complained about, but were lucky to have. Coffee shops opened their doors. The world continued moving, and Emily walked toward Ruby's Corner Diner, the one place that had given her a chance when almost everyone else had decided she wasn't worth the trouble. Ruby's was an old family-owned diner located on the edge of downtown. The sign outside flickered sometimes, and the booths had cracks in the leather, but to Emily, it felt like home. The owner, Margaret Lewis, had hired her 3 years earlier when other employers had rejected her. Emily still remembered that interview. She had walked in nervous, expecting another polite rejection. Margaret had looked at her resume, looked at her face, and then looked directly into her eyes. "You know how to work hard?" Margaret had asked. Emily nodded. "Then I don't care about anything else." That sentence had stayed with her. Because after months of feeling like her scar was the only thing people saw, someone had finally seen her. By 7:00 am, Emily was already moving between tables, coffee refills, breakfast orders, smiles, apologies, use. She knew every regular customer. Mr. Peterson liked extra sugar. The elderly couple near the window always shared one slice of pie. The construction workers wanted their eggs cooked differently every single day. Emily remembered everything, because making people cared for was something she had always been good at. "Morning, Emily." Margaret called from behind the counter. "Morning, Maggie." Margaret watched her for a moment. "You slept?" Emily laughed softly. "That's a dangerous question. You look tired." "I'm fine." Margaret gave her the look that only older women seemed to master. The look that said, "I know you're lying, but I'll let you pretend for now. You don't always have to be strong, you know." Emily looked down at the coffee pot in her hand. "I don't know how to be anything else." Margaret's expression softened. Before she could answer, the bell above the door rang. 2 men walked in, and Emily immediately knew they were different from the usual customers. They weren't wearing work clothes. They weren't carrying backpacks or newspapers. They looked expensive. The first man was tall, probably in his late 40s, wearing a perfectly fitted navy suit and a watch that probably cost more than Emily's yearly salary. The second man was younger, carrying a leather briefcase and talking loudly on his phone. They walked into the diner like they owned the place. Emily grabbed her notepad. She had learned something over the years. Some people entered a room hoping to be respected. Others entered a room expecting it. The older man belonged to the second group. She approached their table. "Good morning. Welcome to Ruby's Corner. Can I get you something to drink?" The younger man didn't even look at her. "Coffee." The older man looked up, and his eyes stopped. Not on her name tag, not on her smile, on her scar. Emily felt it happen. That tiny pause. That moment where someone decided what they thought of her before she had even spoken. The man stared for a few seconds. Then he smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the kind of smile that made Emily's stomach tighten. "Interesting," he said. Emily forced herself to stay professional. "Sir." He leaned back in his seat. "I was just wondering something." She waited. "How does someone like you work in a place where customers have to look at you while they eat?" The words landed harder than she expected. The younger man looked up from his phone. A few nearby customers became quiet. Emily stood still. She had heard cruel words before. She had survived worse. But something about the casual way he said it hurt more. Like he wasn't trying to hurt her. Like he genuinely believed he was saying something reasonable. "I'm sorry," Emily whispered. The man laughed. "Oh, don't pretend you don't know what I mean." His eyes moved toward her scar again. "I'm just saying, if I owned this place, I would probably put you somewhere in the back. Kitchen maybe. Somewhere customers don't have to see." The entire diner seemed to become silent. Emily's fingers tightened around her notepad. She wanted to walk away. She wanted to say something. She wanted to ask him how he would feel if someone judged him by the worst moment of his life. But years of humiliation had taught her one thing. Sometimes defending yourself only gives cruel people more power. So she lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry you feel that way, sir." She turned around. But the man wasn't finished. "That's all." Emily stopped. He smiled. "I thought people with scars were supposed to be inspirational or something. Guess some people just want attention. A few people looked uncomfortable, but nobody spoke, and that silence hurt almost as much as his words. Because cruelty is painful, watching everyone choose comfort over courage can hurt even more. Emily felt her throat tighten. She blinked quickly, refusing to let tears fall. Not here. Not in front of them. Not again. The man picked up his coffee cup, satisfied with himself. Then suddenly, another voice filled the diner. Clear. Powerful. That is enough. Emily turned. At the back of the diner, a man who had been sitting alone slowly stood up. He was wearing a black suit, but unlike the arrogant customer, he didn't look like he was trying to prove anything. He simply looked confident. Like he didn't need anyone's approval. The entire room watched as he walked toward the table, and Emily had no idea that this stranger was about to change everything she believed about herself. The stranger stopped beside Emily's table, his presence changing the atmosphere of the diner without him having to raise his voice. Arrogant man in the navy suit looked up, clearly surprised that someone had interrupted him. "Excuse me," he said. The stranger looked at him calmly. I said enough. There was something different about his voice. It wasn't angry. It wasn't aggressive. It was simply certain, the kind of certainty that made people listen. The man in the suit gave a small laugh. "And who exactly are you?" The stranger glanced briefly at Emily, then back at him. "Someone who knows the difference between an opinion and cruelty." The diner became completely silent. Emily stood frozen a few steps away, still holding her notepad. She expected someone to defend her eventually. Maybe Margaret. Maybe one of the regular customers who had known her for years. But this man, he didn't even know her. Why would he care? The rude customer leaned back in his seat. "Look, friend, I was just making an observation." "No," the stranger replied. "You were making an insult and disguising it as an observation." The younger man sitting across from the rude customer shifted uncomfortably. The stranger continued. "You looked at her face and decided you knew her entire story. You saw a scar and assumed weakness. You saw something different and decided it made her less valuable." The man's expression hardened. "This doesn't concern you." The stranger nodded slowly. "Maybe it doesn't. But watching someone humiliate another person in public concerns everyone who still believes basic respect matters." Those words stayed in the air. Emily felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not embarrassment, not shame, something else. Relief. The stranger wasn't looking at her scar. He wasn't looking at the damage. He was looking at the person behind it. The rude man grabbed his coffee cup. People are too sensitive these days. The stranger smiled slightly. "No, people are just tired of pretending cruelty is confidence." A few customers lowered their heads, hiding smiles. The man looked around and realized something. Nobody was laughing with him. Nobody agreed with him. For the first time since he entered the diner, he looked uncomfortable. He reached for his wallet. "Let's go." His younger companion quickly followed. As they walked toward the door, the stranger spoke one last time. "Before you leave, you should know something." The man stopped. The stranger pointed gently toward Emily. "She has probably spent years fighting battles you know nothing about. The least you could do is not become another one." The man didn't respond. He simply walked out. The bell above the door rang, and then the diner slowly came back to life. Conversations restarted. Forks moved. Coffee cups were lifted. Emily remained standing there. She didn't know what to say. She had imagined someone defending her many times. But in every fantasy, she was different, more confident, more prepared, more like the person she used to be. She never imagined needing someone to defend the version of herself she had become. The stranger looked at her. "Are you okay?" It was a simple question, but it almost broke her, because nobody asked that anymore. People asked if she needed anything. They asked if she was finished with an order. They asked if the table was ready. but they rarely asked if she was okay. Nodded quickly. Yes, I'm fine. The stranger studied her expression, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, in a way that made her feel noticed. You're allowed to say you're not. Emily looked away. She wasn't used to kindness from strangers, especially not the kind that expected nothing in return. Thank you, she finally whispered. The man gave a small smile. You don't need to thank me for something everyone should have done. Then he walked back to his table. Emily watched him sit down and open the laptop he had been working on before everything happened, as if standing up for someone who had been publicly humiliated was just a normal part of his day. But for Emily, it wasn't normal. It was something she would remember. The rest of her shift passed differently. Nothing about the diner had changed. Same customers came in. The same dishes needed to be washed. The same orders needed to be taken. But something inside Emily had shifted. She caught herself standing straighter. She stopped pulling her hair over her scar every few minutes. She even smiled without immediately wondering if people noticed. When the stranger finally finished his meal, Emily approached his table with the check. Everything was good, she asked. He looked up. Very good. She placed the receipt down. Then she hesitated. I wanted to say thank you again. He closed his laptop. You already did. I know. I just... She searched for the right words. Nobody has ever done that for me before. The man's expression softened. Then people around you have failed you. Emily gave a small, uncomfortable laugh. That's a heavy thing to say. Sometimes the truth is heavy. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he extended his hand. I'm Daniel. Emily looked at his hand before shaking it. Emily. Nice to meet you, Emily. There was nothing dramatic about the moment. No music, no magical feeling. Just two strangers meeting in an ordinary diner. But sometimes the biggest changes in life begin quietly. Daniel picked up his jacket. I hope you don't let one person's ignorance change the way you see yourself. Emily looked at him. I try not to. Keep trying. Then he left. For the rest of the day, Emily thought about those words. Keep trying. Someone else. Not hide. Not pretend. Just keep trying. That evening, when she returned to her apartment, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror again. The same mirror. The same scar. The same reflection. But somehow it felt different. She touched her cheek. For years, she had looked at the scar as proof that something had been taken from her. Her beauty, her confidence, her old life. But maybe it was also proof of something else. That she survived. That she was still standing. The next morning, Emily arrived at Ruby's earlier than usual. Margaret noticed immediately. You look different. Emily smiled. Different good or different bad? Margaret laughed. Different like someone finally remembered who they are. Emily looked down. Met someone yesterday? Margaret raised an eyebrow. Oh, not like that. Yet. Emily laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind she hadn't heard from herself in a long time. She told Margaret about what happened. About the customer. About Daniel. About the way he had spoken. Margaret listened quietly. When Emily finished, the older woman smiled. Some people enter our lives for a reason. Emily shook her head. He's just a stranger. Sometimes strangers see things our own minds refuse to see. Emily didn't know it then, but Daniel Wells was not an ordinary stranger. He was the founder and CEO of one of the fastest growing technology companies in the country. His name appeared regularly in business magazines. He had built a company worth billions before the age of 40. People described him as brilliant, disciplined, and impossible to impress. But none of those articles mentioned the thing Emily would eventually discover. That beneath all the success, Daniel was also someone who understood what it felt like to be judged. Because years before he became a millionaire CEO, he had been the person nobody noticed. He grew up in a small neighborhood where his mother worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. He knew what it felt like to enter rooms where people assumed they knew his worth before he spoke. He knew what it felt like to be underestimated. Maybe that was why Emily's situation bothered him, because he recognized something familiar: pain. The kind people hide behind smiles. 3 days passed. Emily wondered if she would ever see him again. She told herself it didn't matter. After all, he was a stranger. People came and went. That was life. But on Friday afternoon, when the diner was quiet between lunch and dinner, the bell above the door rang. Emily looked up. Daniel Wells. Same calm expression, same confident posture, same quiet presence. But this time, he wasn't sitting alone. He was looking directly at her. "Hello, Emily." Her heart surprised her by beating faster. "Hello, Daniel." He smiled. "I was hoping you'd be here." She tried to hide her surprise. "Really? Really?" He walked toward the same table, where the rude customer had sat days earlier. The same table where Emily had felt the smallest she had ever felt. And somehow, without either of them realizing it yet, that place was about to become the beginning of something that would change both of their lives forever. Daniel sat at the table near the window, the same place where everything had started. Emily stood there for a moment, holding her notepad, wondering why a man like him would return to a small diner on the edge of the city. People like Daniel Wells belonged in places with glass walls and private elevators. They belonged in boardrooms. They belonged on magazine covers. Did not belong in a diner where the coffee machine made strange noises and the chairs had been repaired more times than anyone could count. There he was, and somehow he looked completely comfortable. "Are you ready to order?" Emily asked. Daniel looked at the menu, although she suspected he already knew what he wanted. "Coffee." She smiled slightly. "Hot! For now." "For now." He smiled. "I have a feeling I might stay a while." Emily tried not to react, but something about his answer made her feel strangely warm. She walked away and returned with his coffee. For the next few minutes, Daniel worked quietly on his laptop. Emily continued serving customers, but she noticed something. He wasn't like the wealthy customers she had met before. Many people with money seemed to need everyone around them to know they had it. They spoke loudly. They showed expensive watches. They treated workers like they were invisible. Daniel was different. He thanked every person who brought him something. He moved his own cup when someone needed space at the table. He looked people in the eye. It was strange, because the more successful he seemed, the more humble he appeared. During a slower moment, Emily walked past his table. "You work a lot." Daniel looked up. "Probably too much." She smiled. That's something a lot of people say when they don't want to admit they work too much. He laughed softly. "You're right." She looked at his laptop. "Business?"
Yes?
"What kind?" He hesitated for a second. "Technology." Emily nodded. She wasn't someone who followed business news. She knew names of celebrities and restaurants, but not CEOs. "That sounds complicated." "It is." "Do you enjoy it?" Daniel looked surprised by the question. Most people asked him about money, about success, how much his company was worth. Almost nobody asked if he enjoyed it. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Sometimes. Sometimes I think I built exactly the life I wanted. Other times I wonder if I built a life that only looks impressive from the outside." Emily looked at him carefully. There was something hidden behind those words. A loneliness she recognized. "People probably assume you have everything." Daniel smiled faintly. "People assume a lot of things." The sentence stayed between them, because Emily understood. People assumed things about her too. They saw the scar and assumed weakness. They saw Daniel's wealth and assumed happiness. Both were wrong. That was the first thing they had in common. Both knew what it felt like to be misunderstood. Over the next few weeks, Daniel became a regular customer at Ruby's. Not every day. Not enough to make it obvious. but often enough that Emily started expecting him, and she hated admitting how much she looked forward to it. Their conversations became longer. At first, they talked about simple things: movies, food, the weather. But slowly, the conversations changed. They started sharing pieces of themselves. Daniel told her about growing up with his mother. He described a small apartment where the heating didn't always work, and where his mother would pretend she wasn't hungry so he could have the last piece of chicken. "She was the strongest person I ever knew," he said. Emily smiled. "Sounds like she raised a good man." Daniel looked down. "I hope so." "You don't believe that?" He was quiet. Then he said something Emily didn't expect. "Success changes the way people see you." Emily listened. "They stop asking who you are. They ask what you own, what you can provide, what you can do for them." She understood. That must get lonely. Daniel looked at her. It does. There was honesty in that answer. No pretending, no performance, just truth. Emily had spent years believing wealthy people lived in another world, a world without pain. But Daniel reminded her that pain didn't disappear when someone became successful. Sometimes people just became better at hiding it. One evening after closing, Emily found Daniel still sitting at his table. The diner was almost empty. Only the soft sound of cleaning filled the room. "You know you don't have to stay until closing every time you come here," she said. Looked up. "Am I bothering you?" "No." "Then maybe I like being here." Emily leaned against the counter. "Why?" Daniel looked around the diner. "Because nobody here cares that I'm Daniel Wells." Emily smiled. "They care that you're the guy who always orders black coffee." He laughed. "Exactly." For a moment, they just looked at each other, and Emily felt something she hadn't felt in years. Comfort, not excitement. Not fantasy. Comfort. The kind that came from being around someone who didn't make her feel like she had to prove anything. Then Daniel asked quietly, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Do you always hide your scar?" Emily froze slightly. It wasn't the question, was the way he asked. There was no judgment, no curiosity that felt cruel, just concern. She touched her cheek unconsciously. "Why?" She looked away. "Because people stare." Daniel nodded. "I know." She looked back at him. "You know." "Yes." Emily studied his face. Daniel took a breath. "'Cause people stare at me too." She almost laughed. "At you?" "Yes." "Why?" He smiled. "Because they see the money before they see the person." That answer surprised her. She had never thought about it that way. "That's different." "Is it?" She didn't answer. Daniel continued. "When people see your scar, they create a story about you. They decide you're damaged. When people see my success, they create a story about me too. They decide I'm arrogant, lucky, or empty." Emily nodded slowly. Maybe they were more alike than she realized. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think people are afraid of anything they don't understand." Daniel smiled. "That's a wise thing to say." She shrugged. "My mother used to say people judge what they can't imagine." "Your mother sounds smart." She was. The smile on Emily's face faded slightly. Daniel noticed. "You miss her?" "My father." She looked down. "He died in the accident." Daniel's expression softened. "I'm sorry?" Emily nodded. "Everyone says that. And you hate hearing it." "Sometimes." "Why?" "Because sorry doesn't bring people back." Daniel was quiet. Then he said, "No, it doesn't." The fact that he didn't try to make it better made Emily appreciate him more. Some people rushed to fill silence. Daniel respected it. That night, after she returned home, Emily stood in front of the mirror again. But this time, she wasn't focused only on the scar. She was thinking about everything Daniel had said. Maybe she had spent years believing she was the only person carrying invisible wounds. Maybe everyone had something they were hiding. The next morning, something unexpected happened. When Emily arrived at work, Margaret was standing near the entrance holding a newspaper. "Emily," she looked up. Yes. Margaret turned the newspaper around. On the front page was a picture of Daniel. Emily immediately recognized him. The headline read, "Young tech billionaire Daniel Wells announces expansion into healthcare innovation." Emily stared. Billionaire. The word felt strange. She looked at the photo. The same man who sat in Ruby's drinking coffee. The same man who defended her when nobody else spoke. The same man who listened to her stories like they mattered. "You knew?" Margaret asked. Emily shook her head. "No." Margaret smiled. "I figured you didn't." "Why?" "Because if you knew who he was, you probably would have treated him differently." Emily looked at the newspaper. She realized Margaret was right. If she had known Daniel was a billionaire CEO, she might have been nervous. She might have felt inferior. She might have built a wall before he ever had the chance to know her. Maybe Daniel knew that. Maybe that's why he never mentioned it. Later that day, when Daniel arrived, Emily looked at him differently, not because he was richer, but because she realized something. A man who had everything had chosen to spend time with someone the world had convinced she had nothing. And she couldn't understand why. Not yet, but she was about to find out. Because Daniel Wells had not returned to Ruby's only because he liked the coffee. He had returned because the woman serving it had reminded him of something he had forgotten. That kindness still existed, and that sometimes the people who believe they are the least valuable are the ones who change everything. Daniel continued coming to Ruby's diner. At first, Emily told herself it was nothing. A customer who liked the atmosphere, a successful businessman who wanted a quiet place away from the noise of his usual world. That was all. At least, that was what she tried to believe. But the truth was harder to ignore. She looked forward to seeing him. She noticed when he walked through the door. She noticed when he wasn't there. And she noticed the small things about him that most people probably overlooked, like how he always moved his laptop aside whenever she came to talk, no matter how important the work seemed. Like how he remembered the names of every employee at the diner. Like how he never treated anyone differently, whether they were serving him coffee or sitting across from him at a business meeting. Daniel had millions of dollars, but somehow, the thing Emily noticed most about him was his kindness. One afternoon, the diner was unusually quiet. Rain tapped against the windows, creating a peaceful rhythm throughout the room. Emily placed a cup of coffee in front of Daniel. "You know, I have a question." Daniel looked up from his laptop. "That sounds serious." She smiled. "Why this place?" He looked around. "Ruby's." "Yes, there are hundreds of better restaurants in the city." "Exactly." Daniel leaned back. "That's why." Emily raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't make sense." He smiled. "It does to me." She waited. Daniel looked around the diner. "Places like this remind me of where I came from." Emily listened. "When I was younger, my mother and I didn't have much. We couldn't afford fancy restaurants. We celebrated birthdays at small places like this." He touched the coffee cup. "I remember one waitress who worked at a diner near our apartment. She noticed my mother was tired and secretly gave us extra food because she knew we couldn't afford it." Emily smiled. "Someone was kind to you?" "Yes. And you never forgot?" "Never." The answer was simple. But Emily understood. Some moments stay with people forever. A stranger holding a door. Someone offering help. Someone saying the right words at the right time. Those moments could become lifelines. Daniel looked at her. "That's why I come here." "Because of the waitress. Because of people like her." Emily looked down. "And you think I'm one of those people?" "I know you are." She didn't know how to respond. Because deep down, that was what she wanted. Not to be called beautiful. Not to be told she looked normal. She wanted someone to recognize there was still something valuable inside her. And Daniel did. But life had a way of testing moments of happiness, and Emily's past was not finished following her. A few days later, she received a phone call during her break. The number was unfamiliar. Normally, she ignored unknown calls, but something made her answer. A woman's voice came through. "Is this Emily Carter?" "Yes. My name is Laura Bennett. I'm calling from the Horizon Foundation." Emily frowned. "I'm sorry, I don't know what that is." The woman paused. "I'm calling regarding your application." Emily's heart stopped for a second. "What application?" "The one you submitted for our hospitality management program." Emily sat down. She had forgotten about it. Months earlier, Margaret had encouraged her to apply. "You can't stay a waitress forever if you don't want to," Margaret had told her. Emily had filled out the application, but never expected anything. "I was wondering if you would be available for an interview next week." Emily stared at the floor. An interview, a real opportunity. The old Emily would have been excited. The new Emily was terrified, because she knew what happened when people met her. They noticed the scar. They changed. She almost said no. Almost. Then she remembered something. Daniel's voice. "Don't let one person's ignorance change the way you see yourself." "I'll be there," she said. After hanging up, Emily sat quietly. She had just agreed to something that scared her, and for the first time in years, she was proud of herself. That evening, she told Margaret, "I have an interview." Margaret smiled immediately. "I knew it." Emily laughed. "You knew?" "I knew you were capable of more." Emily looked down. "What if they don't like me?" Margaret's smile softened. "Emily, listen to me." She placed her hand over Emily's. "Anyone who rejects you because of your scar is not rejecting you. They're revealing themselves." Those words stayed with Emily. Interview was 5 days away, and for those 5 days, she prepared. She practiced answers. She updated her resume. She bought a simple professional outfit from a second-hand store. But there was one thing she couldn't prepare for. The moment when someone looked at her face. The moment when she waited for their reaction. The interview took place in a tall glass building downtown. The kind of place Emily normally avoided. People walked quickly through the lobby wearing expensive clothes and carrying briefcases. She felt like she didn't belong. She looked down at her outfit. It was clean, professional, but still not like everyone else. For a moment, she considered leaving. Her phone buzzed. A message. From Daniel. She had given him her number a week earlier. After he insisted, she shouldn't always have to wait for him to visit the diner. The message was simple. Remember, walk in as the person you are, not the person you think they expect. Emily read it twice. She put her phone away and walked inside. The interview went better than she expected. The woman interviewing her, Laura Bennett, was professional and kind. She asked about her experience, her goals, her leadership abilities. Not once did she mention the scar. Not once did she look uncomfortable. When the interview ended, Emily stood up. "Thank you for your time." Laura smiled. "Emily, yes, I want to tell you something." Emily prepared herself. Here it comes. The polite rejection. But instead Laura said, "Your application was impressive. What stood out wasn't your work history." Emily waited. "It was your personal statement." Lee looked confused. "I wrote about rebuilding confidence after trauma." Laura nodded. "Exactly. Do you know how many people talk about success?" "Everyone." She closed the folder. "But very few people understand resilience." Emily left the building feeling lighter. Not because she knew she got the position, but because, for once, someone had seen her effort before seeing her scar. When she returned to Ruby's, Daniel was already there. She walked toward him smiling, and he immediately noticed. Something happened. Emily laughed. "How do you know?" "Because you look different." She stopped. Normally, those words would have scared her, but coming from him, they didn't. "What happened?" "I had an interview." Daniel smiled. "That's great. And it went well." "I knew it would." Emily sat across from him. "You always say things like that." Because they're true. She shook her head. You have too much confidence in me. Daniel looked at her seriously. No, you have too little. The room became quiet. Emily looked away. Because that sentence touched something she had been trying to ignore. She had spent years waiting for the world to change its opinion of her. But maybe the first opinion that needed to change was her own. Later that week, Emily received the call. She got the position. The hospitality program was a 6-month leadership course designed for people who wanted to move into management. It wasn't just a job, a future. When she told Daniel, he looked genuinely happy. I'm proud of you. Emily smiled. You barely know me. Daniel shook his head. I know enough. She looked at him. What do you know? He thought for a moment. I know you survived something that would have broken many people. He continued. I know you still show kindness, even when the world hasn't always shown it to you. Then he smiled. And I know you underestimate yourself. Emily felt tears forming. She quickly looked away. You're making me emotional in a diner. Daniel laughed. Good. Maybe people need to see that CEOs can make waitresses cry. She laughed too. And that laugh felt different. It wasn't the nervous laugh she used when she wanted to disappear. It was real. For the first time in a long time, Emily wasn't just surviving her life. She was beginning to build one. But as her confidence grew, something unexpected began happening. People who had ignored her started noticing her. People who had looked away started looking closer, and not everyone was happy to see her changing. Especially someone from her past. Someone who remembered Emily before the scar, and who had never forgiven her for surviving. Emily had spent years believing her biggest enemy was the scar on her face. She thought the scar was the reason people judged her. The reason opportunities disappeared. The reason strangers looked away. She slowly began to understand something important. The scar was not the thing holding her back. The thing holding her back was the belief that everyone else was right about her. And Daniel had helped her challenge that belief. Not by pretending the world was always kind. Not by telling her everyone would suddenly become better, but by reminding her that other people's opinions did not decide her value. That lesson changed everything. Over the next few months, Emily threw herself into the leadership program. It was difficult. More difficult than she expected. She was surrounded by people who had college degrees from prestigious schools, years of corporate experience, and confidence that seemed effortless. At first, she felt like the outsider again. The same feeling she had carried for years, the feeling of walking into a room and wondering if everyone could see the parts of her she was ashamed of. But this time, something was different. She didn't run. She didn't shrink. She stayed. Every day, she reminded herself, I belong here. It was a simple sentence. But for Emily, it was revolutionary. Daniel continued supporting her, but he never took over her journey. That was one of the things she respected most about him. He never tried to save her. He never acted like she was a broken person who needed fixing. He simply stood beside her. One evening, they sat outside Ruby's diner after closing. The city lights reflected on the wet pavement after a summer storm. Emily held a cup of coffee between her hands. I used to think people like you only existed in movies. Daniel smiled. People like me, successful people who actually care. He laughed softly. That's a dangerous compliment. Why? Because it implies most successful people don't. Emily looked at him. Do they? Daniel thought about it. Some people become successful because they want power. Others become successful because they want freedom. The problem is, somewhere along the way, many people forget why they started. Emily nodded. Why did you start? Daniel looked away toward the street. Because I never wanted my mother to worry about money again. His voice became quieter. She spent her whole life sacrificing for me. I wanted to give her everything she deserved. Emily smiled. Did you? Daniel was silent. Then he answered honestly. I gave her things. He looked down. But I didn't give her enough time. Emily understood. Success always had a cost. Even when people only saw the rewards. She's still alive? Emily asked. Daniel nodded. She lives in Florida now. Do you visit? Not enough. Emily smiled gently. Maybe that's something you should fix. Daniel looked at her. The way she said it wasn't judgmental. It was caring, and that was what made him listen. You know, he said, most people around me tell me what they think I want to hear. Emily shrugged. Maybe you need more people who tell you what you need to hear. Daniel smiled. Maybe I do. Their friendship grew stronger, and slowly, something else began growing too. Something neither of them wanted to rush. They both had reasons to be careful. Emily had spent years protecting herself. Daniel had spent years protecting his heart, but every conversation made the walls between them lower. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a charity event hosted by Daniel's company. Emily only attended because Daniel invited her. I don't belong there, she had told him. You belong anywhere you choose to stand. She had rolled her eyes. You always have an answer, only when I'm right. She laughed. The event was held in a beautiful hotel downtown. Crystal lights hung from the ceiling, wore designer clothes. Servers carried expensive drinks. Emily walked into the room wearing a simple black dress. She had borrowed from a friend. She felt nervous. Everyone looked polished, perfect. She immediately noticed the difference between herself and the people around her. But then Daniel appeared beside her, and suddenly the room felt less intimidating. You look beautiful. Emily smiled. You have to say that. No, I don't. She looked at him. Daniel wasn't looking at her scar. He wasn't looking at her dress. He was looking at her. And somehow that meant more. Throughout the evening, Emily met many people from Daniel's world. Some were kind. Some were curious. And some were exactly what she expected. People who measured everyone by status. One woman approached them near the balcony. She was elegant, wealthy, and confident. Daniel. He turned. Victoria. The woman's eyes moved to Emily. And who is this? Answered calmly. This is Emily Carter. Victoria smiled. Nice to meet you. But her expression changed slightly when she noticed the scar. It was subtle. A small movement. A quick reaction. But Emily noticed. She always noticed. Victoria recovered quickly. I see. Emily knew that tone. The polite tone people used when they were trying not to show what they really thought. Daniel noticed too. Victoria. She looked at him. Yes, careful. Her smile disappeared. About what? About assuming you know someone's story. The warning was gentle, but clear. Victoria walked away. Emily looked at Daniel. You didn't have to do that? Yes, I did. She smiled. You always say that. Because it's true. For years, Emily had been embarrassed whenever someone defended her. Because she thought it made her look weak. She understood something. Being protected didn't mean she was powerless. Sometimes allowing people to stand beside you was also strength. Later that night, as they stood outside the hotel, Daniel looked at her. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever think about getting rid of the scar? Emily touched her face. Question didn't hurt from him. Sometimes. What stops you? She thought about it. Fear. Of what? Of becoming someone else. Daniel nodded slowly. That's honest. She looked at him. What would you do if you were me? He took a moment, then said, I wouldn't ask what other people wanted. She waited. I'd ask what you want. That answer stayed with her, because everyone had always had an opinion about her scar. Some people wanted her to hide it. Some people wanted to tell her it didn't matter. Some people wanted to make it the center of her identity. But nobody had asked what Emily wanted. Not until Daniel, a month later, made a decision. She researched reconstructive options. Not because she hated herself. Not because Daniel suggested it. because she wanted the choice. The doctor she consulted explained everything carefully. The procedure wouldn't erase her past. It wouldn't turn her into someone new. It would simply soften the scar, make it less noticeable. Emily sat in the consultation room, thinking about all the years she had spent wishing people would look beyond it. Now she had the chance to change it. But she also realized something important. Even if the scar stayed exactly the same, she was different. The person staring back at her in the mirror was no longer someone waiting to be accepted. She was someone who had finally accepted herself. When she told Daniel about her decision, he didn't celebrate the surgery. He celebrated her confidence. "I'm proud of you." Emily smiled. "You always say that." "Because I always mean it?" She looked at him. "Yes." "Why do you care so much?" The question had been sitting inside her for months. Daniel became quiet. For the first time, he seemed nervous. "I don't know when it happened." "What?" "When you stopped being someone I wanted to help," he paused, "and became someone I wanted beside me." Emily's breath caught. Neither of them spoke. The city moved around them. Cars passed. People walked by. But for a moment, it felt like the entire world had become quiet. Because sometimes the biggest changes don't happen with dramatic moments. Sometimes they happen with a simple truth finally being spoken. And for Emily, that truth was terrifying. Because she had spent years afraid nobody would ever see past her scar. Now she had found someone who saw everything, including the parts she had spent years trying to hide. The silence between Emily and Daniel that night was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that happens when two people finally say something they have been afraid to admit. Emily looked down at her hands. For years, she had wondered if anyone would ever see beyond what happened to her. She had wondered if anyone would ever look at her without seeing the accident first, and now there was someone standing in front of her who had done exactly that. But that did not mean it was easy. Love was not easy for someone who had spent years protecting herself. Trust was not easy for someone who had been disappointed over and over again. Emily knew how to survive. She knew how to work hard. She knew how to keep going when things hurt. But letting someone get close enough to matter was something completely different. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Daniel smiled softly. "You don't have to say anything." She looked at him. "Most people expect something. I don't." "Why?" "Because I know what it's like to feel like you're always supposed to perform for other people." Those words touched her, because that was exactly how she had lived. Always proving. Always trying to convince people she was more than what they saw. Daniel stepped closer, but he didn't touch her. He gave her space. That was something Emily noticed about him. He never took. He offered. "I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything," he said. Emily swallowed. "Daniel." "I'm serious." She looked at him. "I don't want to be another person who makes you feel like you have to become someone else to be loved." Her eyes became emotional, because that was the difference. Other people had looked at her and seen something to fix. Daniel looked at her and saw someone to understand. A few weeks later, Emily made the decision to have the procedure. The day she arrived at the clinic, she felt every emotion at once. Excitement, fear, doubt, hope. She sat in the waiting room, holding a cup of tea she barely drank. Daniel sat beside her. Not in front of her, not speaking for her, just beside her. "You can still change your mind," he reminded her. Emily looked at him. "You mean that?" "Completely." She smiled slightly. "Most people would tell me to just do it. Most people aren't the one living your life." That answer gave her comfort. Because this was not about becoming worthy. She already was. This was about choosing something for herself. When the nurse finally called her name, Emily stood up. Her hands trembled slightly. Daniel noticed. "You know something." "What?" "The woman walking into that room is already brave." Emily smiled. You always know what to say. No. He shook his head. I just finally met someone who needed to hear the truth. The procedure went well. The recovery was difficult. There were uncomfortable days. There were moments when Emily looked in the mirror and wondered if she had made the right choice. Healing was never as simple as people imagined. People often saw the final result. They rarely saw the difficult middle, the uncertainty, the fear. Daniel stayed connected every day, but he never made the process about himself. He didn't ask what she would look like afterward. He didn't ask when she would be finished. He asked how she felt. That mattered more, because Emily realized something. The scar was changing, but the bigger change was happening inside her. She was learning to stop measuring herself through other people's reactions. 3 weeks later, Emily returned home. The first time she looked into the mirror, she stood there for a long time. The scar was still there. It had not disappeared, was softer now, less visible, but still part of her. And strangely, that made her smile, because she had spent years thinking happiness would come when the scar was gone. But happiness had arrived before that. It arrived when she stopped believing the scar was the thing that made her less. When she returned to Ruby's, everyone noticed. Margaret was the first person to see her. She walked out from behind the counter and immediately hugged her. I missed you. Emily laughed. I missed you too. Margaret pulled back and looked at her. You look different. Emily smiled. I know. Margaret shook her head. No. She touched Emily's arm. That's not what I mean. Emily waited. You look like you finally stopped carrying a heavy bag you forgot you were holding. That sentence made Emily emotional, 'cause Margaret understood. The biggest weight had never been on her face. It had been in her heart. The customers reacted in different ways. Some noticed the physical change. Others didn't mention it at all, and Emily appreciated that. She was learning something important. Her value did not depend on whether people noticed her. That evening, Daniel picked her up after work. They walked through the city slowly. No expensive restaurant. No grand gesture. Just two people walking together. I was thinking, Daniel said. Emily smiled. That's usually when you say something serious. Maybe. She looked at him. What were you thinking? I was thinking about how strange life is. How so? A year ago, I was sitting in that diner 'cause I needed a quiet place to work. And now? Now I can't imagine my life without that diner. Emily smiled. Because of the coffee. Daniel looked at her. Because of you. Her heart skipped. He continued walking. I had spent years building things, companies, products, a reputation. He paused. But I wasn't building a life. Emily listened. You changed that. She looked away. I didn't do anything. Daniel stopped walking. That's what you always say. Because it's true. No, Emily. His voice was gentle. But it's not. She looked at him. You taught me something. What? That being seen is one of the greatest gifts someone can receive. The words stayed with her, because that was exactly what he had given her. Not money, not surgery, not a new life. He had given her the feeling that she mattered. Months passed. Their relationship became something everyone around them noticed. They never rushed. They didn't need to. Built their connection through ordinary moments. Cooking dinner together. Talking late at night. Walking through parks. Sharing stories. The things that created real relationships, not grand gestures. Small ones. Emily learned things about Daniel too. She learned that despite his confidence, he sometimes struggled with feeling alone. She learned that he kept old photographs of his mother everywhere. She learned that he secretly hated public speaking, but forced himself through it. She learned that behind the successful CEO was simply a man who wanted to be loved for who he was, not what he owned. One night, they sat together in Daniel's apartment overlooking the city. Emily looked out the window. Your life looks so different from mine. smiled. Does it?
Yes? How?
She turned toward him. You have everything. He shook his head. I have things. She looked at him. There's a difference. Emily thought about that, and she realized he was right. A person could have money and still feel empty. A person could have scars and still feel whole. Life was never as simple as it appeared. The world loved easy labels: rich, poor, beautiful, damaged, successful, failed. People were always more complicated than the labels placed on them. That was what Emily and Daniel understood better than most. Had both been judged by one small part of their story, and both had spent years proving they were more. The biggest surprise came one afternoon when Emily received a message from the Horizon Foundation. They wanted her to speak at an upcoming event. At first, she thought it was a mistake. She read the email 3 times. They wanted her to share her story. Her first reaction was fear. Public speaking had always terrified her. Talking about her scar in front of strangers felt impossible. She showed Daniel the email. He read it carefully, then smiled.
Emily immediately shook her head numbly.
Yes. Daniel, Emily. She laughed. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. I'll be standing in front of hundreds of people.
Yes.
They'll look at me.
Yes.
She frowned. You're supposed to make me feel better. I am. How? By reminding you that you've already survived the hardest audience. Which one? Yourself. Emily became quiet, because once again he was right. The person she had spent the longest trying to convince was herself. And maybe it was time she finally listened. She accepted, and as the event approached, she prepared. Not a perfect speech. Not a speech designed to impress people. A truthful one. A story about pain. About fear. About learning that broken things could still become beautiful. Because Emily finally understood something. The scar had never been the ending of her story. It had only been the place where a new chapter began. The night of the Horizon Foundation event arrived faster than Emily expected. She stood backstage holding the pages of her speech, although she had already memorized every word. The room was filled with people she didn't know. Executives, community leaders, people who had accomplished incredible things. A year ago, walking into a room like this would have made her want to disappear. She would have noticed every person looking at her. Every possible judgment. Every possible whisper. But tonight was different. She still felt nervous. She still felt the familiar tightening in her chest. But she was not afraid of being seen anymore. Daniel stood beside her backstage. He had attended hundreds of events like this. He had spoken in front of thousands of people. Yet somehow, he looked more nervous for her than he ever looked for himself. You ready? He asked. Emily looked at him. No, he smiled. She laughed. Good. Yes. Why is that good? Because the people who care usually feel nervous. It means this matters. Emily looked down at her speech. I never imagined I would be standing here. Daniel nodded. I know, she smiled. Do you remember the first time you saw me? I remember exactly. I thought you were going to tell me I should ignore that man. Daniel shook his head. No. What? What? I wanted to tell you that he was wrong. Emily looked at him. There is a difference. She thought about that. And she realized he was right. Ignoring cruelty was sometimes necessary for survival. Knowing cruelty was wrong was necessary for healing. A staff member approached them. Emily, you're next. Her heart started beating faster. She took a deep breath. Then she walked toward the stage. The lights were brighter than she expected. Audience looked enormous. For a brief second, the old Emily appeared. The girl who hid. The girl who covered her face. The girl who believed she had to apologize for existing. Then she remembered everything. The accident. The pain. The rejection. The diner. The stranger who stood up. The man who believed in her before she believed in herself. And she smiled. Good evening. Her voice was steady. My name is Emily Carter. The room became quiet. I spent many years believing the first thing people noticed about me was the most important thing about me. She touched her cheek, the scar on my face. Everyone listened. I thought it represented everything I had lost. She paused. My confidence, my dreams, the person I used to be. Her eyes moved across the audience. But I was wrong. The words felt powerful because they were true. A scar is not proof that someone is broken. Sometimes a scar is proof that someone survived. The room remained silent, not uncomfortable silence, respectful silence. Emily continued. For years I wanted people to look past my scar. I wanted them to see my heart, my kindness, my dreams. She smiled slightly. But the truth is, I was also guilty of something. People leaned forward. I wasn't seeing myself either. That sentence carried more weight than anything else. Sometimes the person judging us the most is not a stranger. Sometimes it is the voice inside our own minds. Emily shared her story. Not every painful detail, not every moment of sadness, but enough. Enough for people to understand. Enough for someone else sitting in that room to recognize their own struggle. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then people stood. The applause came slowly, then louder. Emily looked toward the side of the stage. Daniel was standing. Not clapping because he was proud of a performance. Clapping because he was proud of the woman who had found her voice. After the event, many people approached Emily. Some shared their own stories. A woman told her she had spent years hiding a birthmark. A man told her he had stopped chasing his dreams after an accident changed his appearance. An older woman held Emily's hand and said, "You have no idea how many people needed to hear that." And Emily believed her, because she finally understood something. Stories mattered, not because they were perfect, because they were honest. Later that night, Emily and Daniel walked outside. City was quiet. The event was over. The lights behind them slowly disappeared as they walked down the street. "You were incredible," Daniel said. Emily smiled. "I was terrified." "I know." "How?" "Because I know you." She looked at him. That answer meant more than any compliment. Because being known was different from being admired. Admiration could disappear. Understanding stayed. A few months later, Emily officially completed the leadership program. She was offered a management position at a larger hospitality company. It was the kind of opportunity she once believed belonged to someone else. But she accepted. Not because she wanted to prove people wrong. That was the old motivation. The new Emily wanted something different. She wanted to build places where people felt valued, especially people who had been overlooked. She created training programs focused on treating employees with respect. She hired people who had been rejected because of their backgrounds, because she remembered what it felt like to be judged before being given a chance. Daniel helped when she needed advice. He always reminded her, "This is your achievement," and she believed him. Their relationship continued growing, slowly, naturally. There was no magical moment where everything became perfect. Real love was not perfect. It was two people choosing each other repeatedly, difficult. On stressful days. On ordinary days. One evening, almost 2 years after they first met, Daniel took Emily back to Ruby's diner. The place looked almost exactly the same. The same booths. The same coffee machine. The same old sign outside. Emily smiled as they entered. "I can't believe this place started everything." Daniel looked around. "Neither can I." They sat at the table where he had defended her. Emily ran her hand along the edge of the table. "Day. Every day." She looked surprised. "Really?" "Yes." "Why?" Daniel smiled. "Because that was the day I met someone who changed my life." Emily looked down. "You always make everything sound so simple." "Maybe because it is." "What do you mean?" "I spent years searching for success." He looked around the diner. "Then I found meaning." Emily felt tears forming. Not tears of sadness. The kind of tears that came when life became better than you expected. A few weeks later, Daniel asked Emily to marry him. There was no giant crowd, no expensive display, no cameras. Just the two of them in the place where their story began. He held her hand. "Emily Carter, I don't love you because you overcame something." She looked at him. "I don't love you because you're strong." He smiled. "I love you because you're you." Her eyes filled with tears. "You make me feel seen." Daniel squeezed her hand. "Because you are." They married in a small garden, surrounded by the people who mattered most. Emily wore a simple dress. She didn't cover her scar. She didn't hide it. Not because she wanted people to notice. Because she no longer cared if they did. It was part of her. A chapter, not the whole book. Years later, Emily sometimes thought about the girl standing in front of the bathroom mirror, trying to cover a scar she believed defined her. She wished she could go back and tell that girl something. She would tell her, "You are not what happened to you. You are not the cruel words someone says about you. You are not the thing people notice first. You are everything you survive, everything you learn, everything you give. And sometimes, the very thing you think makes you unworthy becomes the thing that leads you to the people who truly see you." Emily never forgot the day a stranger stood up for her. But she also never forgot the day she finally stood up for herself, because that was the real transformation, not the scar fading, not the attention changing, not the world finally accepting her. The greatest change was that Emily stopped waiting for the world to tell her she mattered. She already knew. And that was something nobody could ever take away.